In the grand old county of Yorkshire in England, there's a village where the tea is always piping hot, the scones are always fresh from the oven, and you better avoid the dimensional rift by the bins behind the antiques shop. Join me, your storyteller, as we take a walk through Wychbeck. The bar of the Blue Dragon public house smells of polish, pints of old Bostwick ale, and the remains of the ectoplasm that was mopped up last Thursday. George Undercliffe, the landlord, polishes a glass with the expression of a man who's heard it all before. Colonel Dander, retired, sits at the bar, jabbing his finger at a map of the village. "Those bloody Druids are back," Colonel Dander says, voice ripe with irritation. "Mark my words, they'll try to park their camper vans by the allotments again. Last year they dug up the cabbages because they said they were obstructing a ley line. Absolute bloody menace, if you ask me." "Now then, Reg," George chuckles, "they'll soon head off home. Tourists are good for business. Sabrina's already sold out of candles. She had them marked up at twice the usual price, and those Druids never batted an eyelid." "It's the noise, man," Colonel Dander continues, throwing his arms up. "The endless bloody chanting. And that tree on the green hasn't stopped going on about his roots ever since they arrived. It's distracting the cricket team, playing merry hell with batting practice." At the village green, Giles, the resident sentient English oak tree, is creaking his branches and inspecting his emerging spring leaves. A group of school children, under the supervision of headmistress Emily Winstanton, are sketching him. "The balance is shifting, Emily," Giles rumbles. "My roots are starting to itch. I haven't felt anything like it since the 1860s. "That's nice, Giles dear," Emily says, clearly distracted as she inspects her group's drawings. "But you really must stay still for the children. It makes it terribly difficult when they have to keep redrawing your branches." Emily glances sideways as she sees someone approaching. James Walker is striding towards her. He smiles, and Emily hurriedly looks back down at the nearest drawing. "Could I have a word with you about the sponsorship?" James says. "You know I'm more than happy to contribute towards your archery club." "It's very important for the children to learn self-defence," Emily interrupts. "I'm very grateful." She gives him her sweetest smile. Well, yes," James stumbles over his words a little. "But I can't have them shooting towards the polytunnels anymore. How am I meant to run a garden centre if the customers feel like they're at the Battle of Agincourt? There must be 50 arrows in the rhododendrons." "Those rhododendrons were trying to eat a cat, James," Emily says. "Were they?" James replies, taken aback. "That's those bloody Druids. They said the ritual would improve flowering, not turn them homicidal. Right, I'm going to have a word with them." James stalks off. Emily raises a hand and calls after him. "I was hoping we might talk about buying some swords." At the antiques shop, Gordon Hale is dusting an ornate mahogany wardrobe. He stops. He frowns. The bright yellow duster he's been using begins to drain of all colour, turning to a stone grey. Then it becomes stiffer and stiffer. It's not just changing colour, it's becoming stone. He drops it. Thud. It hits the floor and doesn't even bounce. That's when the knocking starts. A slow and steady knocking on the wardrobe door. From the inside. Gordon hesitates, then turns the key in the lock, and opens the door just a crack. Swirling grey smoke spills out and begins to curl around his feet. "Pardon me," a voice says from within the wardrobe. "What year is it? It feels like I've been in here for at least a century." Over at the village post office, Mary Coleman, the postmistress, has just steamed open a letter addressed to Sir Montague Stride. Her daughter, Lucy, is sanding down a chair over in the corner. "Listen to this," Mary says, reading the letter. "Monty's bought transdimensional insurance. What would he want with that at his age? And Lady Wilhelmina came in and ordered 3 bottles of ectoplasm repellent last week. They're clearly expecting a messy spring." "Mum," Lucy exclaimed, "will you stop reading the letters?" You do know it's an actual offence, don't you? At the very least, you'll get a right talking to by Constable Garrett if anybody sees you. Lucy snatches the letter out of her mother's hand, carefully refolds it, and puts it back in its envelope. Garrett? Huh! Mary scoffs. He's too busy trying to find that Jenny with the lantern for loitering by the pond. Oh, look! There's a postcard here from Scott for his mum. It's from Thailand. No sooner has Mary said those words than the postcard flies out of her hand and hovers in mid-air, glowing in a rather attractive shade of pastel blue. Lucy makes a grab for it, but it evades her and flies out through the open window. Mother and daughter rush over to watch the postcard dart off in the direction of the blue dragon. Well, I never, said Mary. At that moment, over in the pub, the pint of old Bostwick that George has just set down on the bar begins to glow pastel blue. What's this, then? George said, leaning in to examine the pipe more closely. I only cleaned the pipes out yesterday. At the antiques shop, Gordon Hale is backing away from the wardrobe. The carpet under his feet is turning the colour of a depressing winter sky, as smoke continues to pour from the wardrobe and wrap itself around everything in the shop. To his horror, he watches as a vibrant Moorcroft vase transforms into a grey plastic plant pot. Then a group of chairs begin to melt and reform. Not the Louis XIV, Gordon pleads, to no avail, as the chairs settle into their new forms as those grey plastic seats you find in tedious waiting rooms. There's a polite cough from within the wardrobe. I say, old chap, could you ask someone to fetch whoever's in charge? I've been waiting a very long time to deliver the cancellation order to this village. The what? Gordon says. What are you? Why are you doing this? I'm from the Ministry of Metaphysical Affairs. Do be a good fellow and have a servant bring over the man in charge. And I don't suppose you have such a thing as a cup of tea while we wait, do you? The voice ended, hopefully. Over at the Blue Dragon, George is still eyeing the glowing pint of old Bostwick with wary suspicion. He reaches out, intending to pour it away. A customer enters the pub and almost has his ear taken off by the glowing postcard as it whips past him through the door and slaps down on the bar. Lucy Coleman runs in through the doorway in close pursuit. Put that pint down, George, Lucy says. I think Scott's in trouble. Scott? George says, looking bewildered, but setting the pint back down on the bar. What's Scott got to do with my pipes? The pint of old Bostwick begins to glow more strongly, and the foam on top of it begins to bubble. As George and Lucy watch, the foam slowly begins to form into the shape of the letter S. S, C, Lucy reads out. O, T, T. Scott, George says. Is that you, lad? Obviously, Lucy says. He's trapped in the pipework. I'm really not following any of this, George says. Lucy plucked the postcard off the bar and held it up in front of George. He's on one of his astral projection holidays. Thailand this time, she says. Very obviously, instead of landing back in his body, he's landed right in a keg of old Bostwick down in your cellar. Something like this happened once before. He was on his way back from Berlin, hit a patch of turbulence in the astral plane over Milton Keynes, and landed in our toaster. Well, bugger me, George says. How do we get him out? Lucy opened her mouth to speak, but was cut off by an anguished cry from behind her. Scott! Where's my Scott? Sabrina Hayward, Scott's mother, bustles in. I can feel his presence. What's happened? I'm afraid he's in the ale, Mrs. Hayward, Lucy says, to which the pint of old Bostwick begins to glow brighter and bubble furiously. At the garden centre, James Walker is sweeping up fallen leaves and twigs from the recently deceased homicidal rhododendrons, muttering under his breath about druidic rituals. Emily Winstanton is standing nearby, ostensibly tidying the rows of pelargoniums in pots, but she keeps stealing glances at James. I suppose they were very apologetic, James says with a sigh. Something about the moon being in the wrong phase and the ritual energy colliding with someone doing an astral projection. Emily moves closer and plucks broken twigs out from amongst the honeysuckles. Thinking about it, James continues, your children probably did me a favour. If the rhododendrons were trying to eat a cat, I imagine they'd have moved on to the customers when they'd gotten a bit bigger. It's very good of you to see it that way, Emily says. Truly, I've always said you had a very fine community spirit. It's just that the loss of stock is hard to take after the theft of all those garden gnomes, James says. I thought P.C. Garrett got most of them back, Emily replies. He did, but half of them had glowing blue eyes. That sort of thing makes the customers very nervous. I had to sell them on at a loss to a garden centre in Bradford. Emily moves still closer, running her finger down the trellis. I do understand it's not really the best time, James, but about those swords? Her voice trails away as tendrils of grey smoke writhe along the ground and wrap themselves around the plant stands. The vibrant red pelargoniums slowly turn into rows of plastic imitation houseplants. If this is still those bloody Druids, James begins. No, look, Emily interjects, pointing towards the centre of the village. It's coming from the main street, spreading out in all directions. Tendrils of smoke are slowly reaching out all across the village, wrapping around buildings and finding their way through open windows and doors. Everything they touch turns into a pale imitation of its former self. The village green becomes brilliant green artificial grass. Slate roofing becomes uniform grey concrete tiles, and the cobblestone alleys become smooth tarmac. Down at the village green, P.C. Simon Garrett is standing, hands on hips, inspecting Giles. Flipping heck, Giles, Simon says. You're looking a bit peaky. He runs his hand over a section of Giles's trunk that is taking on a distinctly plastic sheen. Giles gives himself a bit of a shake, branches making a squeaking noise rather than the usual creaking. It's draining me of me, Giles says with a struggle. The smoke climbs up his trunk and starts to wrap around his branches. The whole village is ebbing away. I can feel it through my roots. We're becoming a cheap and nasty imitation. Colonel Dander marches up, using his walking stick to back away tendrils of smoke that make grabs at wrapping themselves around his legs. Garrett, situation report, the Colonel barks. This place is starting to look like a display of an English village you'd get in the window of one of those towny department stores. Is this something to do with those bloody Druids? I think someone a bit more potent than the Druids is doing this, P.C. Garrett replied. Good Lord, man, Colonel Dander says. You don't mean the French, surely? Meanwhile, in the manor house on the far side of the village, Sir Montague Stride stands in his drawing room, looking out of the window. Tendrils of smoke are swirling against the glass, searching for a way into the room. The old wooden frames let in plenty of draughts, so it isn't long before the mist is coiling through the gaps, across the carpet and up the walls. Wilhelmina, darling, Sir Montague says. That trans-dimensional policy you insisted upon. The one with the clause about acts of the eldritch gods, dear, Wilhelmina calls from the hallway. That's the one. Are we covered for loss of aesthetic appeal? The Gainsborough of the mantelpiece has just turned into a print of a dog wearing sunglasses and a sombrero. Lady Wilhelmina sweeps into the room. She looks magnificent even as smoke plays around her shoulders. Her cashmere pashmina transforms into a 100% polyester wrap in leopard print. She whips it off her shoulders as the static cling crackles, and her hair begins to lift and drift towards the fabric. Off to the charity shop with you, Wilhelmina says, throwing the offending wrap onto a 19th century chaise longue, just as it transforms into a fluffy, shockingly pink sofa. Oof, Wilhelmina recoils. Then again, the poor have suffered enough. She walks over to the sideboard and picks up a silver teapot, just in the nick of time as smoky tendrils creep across the surface. She breathes on the side of the teapot and rubs it with the cuff of her blouse. Teapot, my teapot, Wilhelmina says. Show me the cause of all this kerfuffle." The shiny silver side of the teapot shimmers and then coalesces into a crystal-clear image of the mahogany wardrobe in Gordon Hale's antique shop. "It's that wardrobe, Monty," Wilhelmina says. "I knew we should never have sold it to him." She puts the teapot under her arm and strides out of the room. "Come along, Monty, dear," she calls as she goes. "Right you are, darling," Montague says. "I'll just get the shotgun." Back at the antique shop, Gordon has brewed a cup of tea and is approaching the wardrobe with the trepidation of a man filing late tax returns. "Milk and 2 sugar all right for you?" he says. "Splendid," the voice replies. A hand at the end of an arm wearing an impeccably tailored suit with a very nice cufflink reaches out through the gap where the wardrobe door is still ajar. It takes the cup from Gordon, then cup, hand and arm disappear back into the smoke-shrouded depths. There's a moment of silence, and then an exhalation of breath, like a man taking off his shoes at the end of a long day. "Most refreshing," says the voice. "I simply can't tell you how much I needed that." "I don't suppose you could stop turning my shop into a car boot sale now, could you?" Gordon asks. "Afraid not, old chap," the voice returns, sounding almost apologetic. "This village's license expired over 160 years ago." "License?" Gordon says. "Your license to be excessively strange, unusual, and interesting," the voice explains. "The village of Wychbeck has been odd as far back as Ministry records can tell, and our records go back an extremely long way, I assure you." Another moment of silence while more tea is drunk. "On account of your tradition of strangeness," the voice continues, "the Ministry always allowed Wychbeck a certain degree of latitude, shall we say?" "Which accounts for Giles," Gordon says, rubbing his chin. "Precisely," the voice says, with the tone of a teacher whose pupil has just answered a difficult sum. "And it served Ministry purposes to have this village as the epicentre of strangeness in these isles for so many centuries. It kept everywhere else much tidier." "So why change what's been working?" Gordon asks. "Victims of your own success, I'm afraid," the voice replies matter-of-factly. "Back in 1852, you understand, a bright young chap at the Ministry pointed out that because Wychbeck had done such a splendid job of collecting strangeness all in one place, we could make things even tidier by sweeping away village strangeness and all. The top brass were frightfully impressed with the potential savings to the ministerial budget." "You want to destroy our village to save money?" Gordon sounds incredulous. "I'm just the messenger, old chap," the voice says. "Ours not to reason why and all that. I arrived back in 1862 to deliver the cancellation to the lord of the manor. He was terribly hospitable, gave me a pleasant dinner and a very fine claret. Then I woke up in here." "Spiked your drink, I expect," Gordon says. "The stories about Monty's great-great-grandfather say he was a sharp rogue." "What I can't fathom," the voice continues, "is why the Ministry didn't send another fellow when I failed in my duty." A noise outside attracts Gordon's attention. He looks out of the window. James and Emily are running across the green towards his shop. They're getting slower and slower as smoke wraps itself around their legs, sucking at them like quicksand. By the time they crash open the shop door, both are panting from the exertion. What's happening, Gordon?" James says. Then both men hear sobbing. They turn to see Emily framed in the doorway. The smoke has slithered up her legs and coiled around her body. She holds out her hands. They're turning grey and stony. Tears trickle down her cheeks, change colour as they fall, and hit the floor as tiny pebbles. "Please, James, help me," Emily sobs. "It's taking the people too," Gordon gasps. James runs over to Emily and claws at the smoke that is enveloping her, but it simply begins to coil around his hands and arms too. He tries to pull away, but the smoke has the strength of superglue. Emily looks into his eyes and begins to say, "I wish..." but trails away as the smoke clamps itself over her mouth. Her eyes open wide in terror. "Emily!" James cries. "Stop it!" Gordon shouts. "Just leave them alone." "Simply can't be done, old chap," the voice from the wardrobe says. "It's better for you not to struggle, much less unpleasant." Gordon rushes at the wardrobe and tries to slam the door shut, but the smoke pouring from it forms into ghostly hands that simply force the door open wider. Roiling, coiling tendrils of smoke wrap around Gordon's legs and swirl upwards. "I do think we should be moving things along. I'd like to wrap it all up by sunset," says the voice. "Ah, and here comes the very man, if I'm not mistaken." Outside, the sun is sinking low, casting long shadows over the artificial turf of the village green. Sir Montague and Lady Wilhelmina are power-walking towards the antique shop. They pass P.C. Garrett, who is attempting to have a conversation with the ghoulish face that has formed in the smoke. He has his notebook out and is wagging his finger. "I must warn you," Garrett says, "if this continues, I'll be seeking antisocial behaviour order." "Usual faffing about," Wilhelmina says in disgust. "Monty, I want you to give that wardrobe both barrels." "Right you are, darling," Sir Montague replies, patting his shotgun. "Not many problems Bertha can't solve." Gordon emerges from the shop doorway, having squeezed past the now largely stoned James and Emily. "Get away, Sir Montague," Gordon shouts. "I think you're all it needs." He is silenced by a smoky hand that bats him aside, sending him to the ground. "So pleased to make your acquaintance," the wardrobe voice calls out across the green. Smoky tendrils surge around Montague and Wilhelmina, holding them in place. Montague raises his shotgun, but it's snatched away by the smoke. "I hereby serve notice, under section 801, subsection 62, paragraph 8, that the ministerial license issued to Wychbeck is revoked," the voice announces. Turbulent, swirling smoke billows through the doorway of the antique shop, smashes out through the windows and erupts from the chimney. Like a tidal wave, it washes over the entire village. Back at the Blue Dragon, Lucy and Sabrina are gathered around the glowing pint of Old Bostwick, while George and a crowd of his regulars make a valiant attempt to bar the doors against the encroaching torrent of smoke. "These doors aren't going to hold," George says. "You ladies, try to get out the back way." "I'm not leaving my Scot," Sabrina says. Lucy is peering at the foam on top of the pint. "Look, he's trying to communicate again." Once more letters begin to form in the foaming head of the pint. D, R, U, I, D, Lucy spells out, then throws her arms up. "Bloody hell, Scott, we don't have time for Scrabble. If you can do something to help, just do it." The pub doors crash open, throwing back George and his regulars. Sabrina screams as roiling smoke billows in. Over at the village green, the sun is now a sliver on the horizon. Sir Montague and Lady Wilhelmina are almost entirely turned to stone, with only their heads still above the churning smoke. "If this is the end, darling," Montague says, "I want you to know that I have cared for you more deeply than for any horse I have ever owned." "Oh, Monty," Wilhelmina replies. "Aye, and more than any dog, too." "Montague Stride," Wilhelmina says, voice quivering. "If I could reach you now, I would peck you on the cheek with a passion you have never felt." "Steady, old girl," Montague says. "Example to be set for the village." Then, with a thundering crack, a column of pastel blue light erupts from the chimney of the Blue Dragon. At its core is the astral form of Scott Hayward. He opens his arms wide, and the column of light shoots ever higher until it hits the clouds. There is a rumble in the heavens, and then a pastel blue rain begins to fall. The smoke visibly flinches at the touch of the rain and starts to retreat towards the antique shop. Scott laughs. As if diving off the highest board at a swimming pool, He darts down through a smashed window of the shop and plunges through the open door of the wardrobe with the force of a juggernaut. A shockwave of neon colour explodes from within. Everything is silent. The street lights flicker on. First Emily and James, then Sir Montague and Lady Wilhelmina, slowly stretch and yawn. A crust of stone falls away from them. James takes a gasping lungful of air. "Emily," he says. "Thank the Lord. Are you all right?" Emily is picking chips of stone from her hair. "I think so." They move towards each other, but are interrupted by a loud crack. The wardrobe disintegrates into a pile of sawdust. In its place stands a confused-looking Victorian gentleman holding a teacup. Gordon comes through the door and dusts himself down. "The man from the Ministry, I presume?" Gordon addresses the Victorian gentleman. "A lot of people are going to want a word with you." Gordon is pushed aside by Sir Montague, who enters rolling up his sleeves. "Right, you blackguard," he says as he advances on the somewhat disorientated-looking Victorian. Later that evening at the Blue Dragon, the pub is packed with celebrating villagers. Scott Hayward, back in his human body, is carried in on the shoulders of two of the regulars. 3 cheers go up. "I'm so proud of you, Scott," Sabrina says, "saving the village like that." Lucy Coleman is leaning on the bar with a smirk and a raised eyebrow. "Go on then, conquering hero," she says. "Tell us how you did it." "Thank the Druids more than me," Scott says as he takes a seat at the bar. It was a splutter from Colonel Dander, who nearly choked on his pint. "I hit the energy from one of their rituals on my flight back from Thailand. James said it was meant to help his plants grow. Well, it knocked me right off course, but also amplified my astral power by about 1,000 times. That's why you were spelling the word Druids," Lucy says. "Yeah," Scott replies. "To get back to my body, I needed to find a way to release the power boost without levelling the village in the process." "What took you so long to kick that wardrobe's ass then, Mr. Hero?" Lucy says. "Wherever that thing was a portal to, I needed it to be wide open," Scott continues. "Then I could channel every bit of druidic energy into it, rather than taking out the village with the release of power. So the wardrobe saved us from you as much as you saved us from the wardrobe," Lucy says, with a mischievous grin. "Pint of old Bostwick for the village saviour," George says, planting a glass of ale in front of Scott. Scott shudders. "Ooh, I couldn't, George. It'd be like cannibalism. I reckon those Druids deserve a round or two, though." "I'll get you a brandy instead, lad," George says, and then gives a wink to Colonel Dander. "And I'll send a keg over to the Druids in the morning." At the Manor House, Sir Montague pours 2 glasses of wine and hands one to Wilhelmina. They're examining the Gainsborough above the mantelpiece. It's back to its former glory, but there is now a digital loading icon in the bottom right corner of the canvas. "Does that insurance policy cover this sort of thing?" says Montague. Wilhelmina sighs. "I'll call the company in the morning, Monty." On the village green, Giles the Oak is talking to the Silent Twins, 2 teenage girls who are busy making a mound out of the sawdust they've collected from the wardrobe. "That danger might be over, girls," Giles says, "but my roots still don't feel right." At the edge of the woods on the outskirts of the village, a pair of neon blue eyes, exactly like the ones on James's stolen gnomes, flicker into existence. Night has settled over the village, and we'll leave its inhabitants to get some sleep. They're going to need it. Join me again soon, and we'll take another walk through Wychbeck.